it's Lou back again. If you remember, in the last episode, I told you that we decided to take a big group trip together to celebrate the end of the semester. Well, everything was going great at first, but then when we were on our cruise, things started to go downhill. Naomi caught Jeremy cheating on her. I found out my parents had filed for bankruptcy, and then to top it all off, I started receiving nasty hate mail forcing me to leave the mansion immediately. So one night, I decided to leave Plutus Heights. I clearly wasn't welcome there, but David spotted me leaving and made me come back home with him so that we could sort it all out. Everybody was so confused about why David had called an emergency meeting. No one had a clue what was going on. Mark saw me crying, so he rushed over to comfort me, and that's when David told everyone that I'd been receiving threats and hate mail over the past week, and that the person who'd written them had said I should leave the mansion ASAP. I looked around the room, and everyone was suddenly suspicious of each other. David spoke up and said,
"Whoever wrote these letters is a coward, and I'm gonna find out which of you did it and kick you out. This kind of bullying is not acceptable at Plutus Heights. Lou, show them the letters."
So I pulled the letters out of my bag and handed them around. Suddenly, Naomi said, "Could it be?" We all went silent and stared at her, waiting for her to finish the sentence, but she didn't say anything more.
Mark got mad and said, "Just spit it out! Say it already!"
Naomi continued, "I'm not sure, but a few days ago I went to Aaliyah's room to get my lipstick that she borrowed. I accidentally dropped it under her bed, and when I picked it up, I found a piece of paper with the letter E that looked like it had been cut out of a magazine or something. Now, looking at this letter, it looks pretty familiar. Aaliyah, it was you, wasn't it?" This made me so confused. "Naomi, do you know what you're talking about? How could it be Aaliyah?" But Naomi was adamant. "The evidence is all there, Lou." "I think this is some kind of misunderstanding," I said. "Aaliyah would never do that." Then suddenly, Aaliyah interrupted us. "Just stop it. Yes, it was me. I wrote those letters, okay? You act like you're some angel, but I've seen the real you. You're a snake. You knew I liked Mark, and I asked you to help us become a couple. But what do? You go behind my back and betray me and steal him from me. You're a traitor. You don't deserve to live here, and you definitely don't deserve to have friends like us." Oh my God, I couldn't hold back my tears. I burst out crying, and Naomi rushed over to hug me. Mark said,
"Stop this. Aaliyah, you're insane. I don't like you, and I never will. What were you thinking?"
I kept crying as I said, "This is why I wanted to leave the mansion. I don't belong here." "Yeah, get the heck out of here. I can't stand living under the same roof as you. Thank God you finally get it." Aaliyah looked at me and spoke in a sarcastic tone. David suddenly stepped in and said,
"The only person who needs to leave is you, Aaliyah. I can't believe how cruel you are. I vote that Aaliyah leaves the house right now. Who's with me?"
Everybody raised their hands, except me. I was just standing there looking at the ground, wishing it would swallow me up. Then Mark said,
"Okay, it's been decided. Aaliyah will leave Plutus Heights. Lou's staying."
At that, Aaliyah lost it. "You traitors! You'll regret this!" she screamed. Then she left and went to her room, slamming the door behind her. We could hear her noisily packing up her room. Then she called her butler to pick her up. I couldn't believe it. How could she treat me like this? I thought we were close friends. A few days later, Naomi also moved out. She couldn't stand being around Jeremy anymore. This made me want to leave too, because the house just felt filled with sad memories now. And also, I couldn't exactly afford it anymore. I called Naomi to tell her this, and she asked me if I wanted to move in with her. Without even thinking about it, I said yes. And I'm so glad I did, because Naomi and I had so much fun living together. We comforted each other and helped each other get over the drama with Jeremy and Aaliyah. We started to do everything together. Shopping, eating out, and I even went with Naomi to some of her modeling shoots. Sometimes we even had movie nights where we'd curl up on the sofa together. Occasionally, I'd noticed Naomi not paying attention to the movie, but just staring at me. And one time I joked, "I know, I'm beautiful." Right? She just laughed and turned away. Then one night, we went to our favorite bar for cocktails. We were having such a fun night, but I think we drank a bit too much, because Naomi told me something that shook me to my core. "Lou, I need to tell you something. I've wanted to tell you for so long. I'm in love with you." I laughed. "I love you too, Naomi." But then Naomi hiccuped and said, "No, Lou, I love you. Like, I'm in love with you. Why else would I ask you to come live with me?" Oh my God. What? I slowly backed away from Naomi and didn't know where to look. This was so horribly awkward. Firstly, I wasn't a lesbian. Secondly, I was dating Mark. And thirdly, was Naomi crazy? "Naomi, you've got this all wrong. I thought we were just best friends. I'm not interested in you in that way. Sorry." I waited for her to reply, and she just smiled and said, "No, I get it. It's okay. Forget about it. I'm just drunk. It's fine. We can still be friends, right?" After that, we went home, and it was so awkward. All I wanted to do was go to bed and wake up and forget it ever happened. Lucky me, after that night, Naomi never mentioned it again. Maybe she knew I was feeling awkward, so she tried to be as cheerful and natural as possible. Even though our conversations were still a bit awkward, but that's okay. I really hoped that it was just a temporary feeling, and Naomi would quickly forget it so that we could remain close friends as we were now. And about Mark, ever since I'd moved in with Naomi, I hadn't seen him as much. Recently, we'd sometimes gone 3 or 4 days without even speaking, and when I called him, he'd often say he was busy and he'd call me back, but he never did. It seemed like there was something wrong, and it made me worried. Then, something terrible happened to our relationship on the day we were supposed to celebrate our 6-month anniversary. On that day, he took me to a fancy French restaurant, and out of surprise, we bumped into Mark's parents, who had just finished eating and were on their way out. Mark looked surprised to see them and said,
"Mom, Dad, what are you doing here?"
His dad spoke up and said,
"We just had dinner with some business partners. And who's this lovely lady? Aren't you going to introduce us?"
Mark said,
"Oh, right, sorry. This is Lou. Her family owns a chain of famous restaurants. Your favorite one, remember?"
Then his dad looked shocked and said,
"Hang on. Is she the daughter of the family who just went bankrupt?"
It was so awkward. Mark suddenly went bright red, and then his dad said,
"You don't really have a brain, do you? What are you doing hanging out with her? She's a nobody. She's got nothing left. A family like hers would just be a burden. Don't you care about your future?"
Then, to my astonishment, he looked at Mark with an absolute determination.
"Do you know how hard your mom and I worked so that you have a secured future? Break up with her immediately. Don't let me see you with her again."
I didn't know how to react and just waited for Mark to stand up to his dad, but all he said was,
"Okay, Dad, I understand."
I couldn't believe it. Then his dad said,
"Great. Your mother will set you up on a blind date with a girl that is more worthy of you. Won't you, dear?"
Then they left and didn't even look at me. I was shaking with rage as I turned to Mark. Never in my life had anyone spoken about me like that before, right in front of me. And the worst part was that Mark hadn't even stood up for me. Not once. What just happened? Why didn't you stand up for me? How could you let him talk to me like that? He's such a... Mark didn't let me finish my sentence and interrupted me angrily, saying,
"Don't you dare. That's my dad. And anyway, what he said wasn't entirely wrong."
I was fuming by this point. Oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Don't I mean anything to you? You didn't even say no when he mentioned the blind date. Mark told me to calm down and said,
"Chill, Lou. It's just a blind date. I'll meet her to keep my parents happy, but obviously I'll reject her. You don't need to worry."
I was shocked. Unbelievable! So, You just do everything to please your parents, don't you? Don't you have your own opinion? You're like a little sheep to them." Mark suddenly exploded and said,
"How dare you!"
I could see he was seriously angry because he gave me a look that I'd never seen before. I couldn't bear it, so I just rushed out of the restaurant in tears. He didn't even bother to chase after me. When I got home, I went straight to my room and buried myself under the covers. I'd never been so disappointed in my life. The way Mark just stood there as his dad badmouthed me and my family? How could he let him do this to me? That weekend, I wanted to try to forget about my sadness. I was sick of lying in bed feeling sorry for myself. So I asked Naomi, Will, and David if they wanted to go on a trip with me. David said we could go stay at his private resort. And so that's what we did. We played golf, got spa treatments, and went to the beach. It cheered me up a bit, but every time I thought about Mark, I got sad again. One evening, Will and I were lying on the beach watching the sunset. Naomi and David were down by the water, and she was doing some high-fashion poses while David took pics of her. Will turned to me and said,
"How are you feeling now? Better, I hope."
I wasn't expecting him to ask me that, so I just said, "What?" "Oh, yes. I'm feeling better, thanks. Much more relaxed." Then Will asked if he could share something with me, and I told him sure. I couldn't believe what he said.
"Lou, I think you should chat to Mark and ask him if he sees a future for the two of you. If he says no, then maybe you should move on."
Hearing Will say that, another guy, it really made me question my relationship with Mark. I just assumed we'd be together forever, which was probably so dumb of me. What if Mark really didn't see a future for us? It was too much to even think about. I didn't want to lose him, even though he'd hurt me so much by not standing up for me. I didn't know what to say. So I asked Will what he would do if he was in Mark's shoes. He looked at me and took a deep breath. Then he said,
"Honestly, Lou, if you were my girlfriend, I would have stood up for you no matter what. I'd never let anyone hurt you. Never."
Then he looked me right in the eyes and didn't stop staring at me. I'd never seen him look at me like this before. What did it mean? Hi, it's me again, Lou. In the last episode, Naomi went crazy at me when she thought Jeremy had cheated on her with me. Then she took it too far and tried to destroy my reputation by locking me in my room so I wouldn't be able to take on the host role of the fashion show. Luckily, a mysterious stranger rescued me. All I knew was that he wore cufflinks with the letter M on them. After that, just when I wanted to give Naomi a piece of my mind, I saw her crying as she found out Jeremy was with another girl. I comforted her and we made up. Then we all went to Arkansas to Will's family's hunting ranch, and that was when I realized who had rescued me that night. Mark! I couldn't stop glancing at Mark's hand as we all ate. It all made so much sense. After the barbecue, Mark said he wanted to go to the observatory to get some fresh air. This was my chance. I waited a bit, and then I headed over there so I could thank him. When I got there, Mark glanced at me, but then he turned back and kept looking at the view. I took the cufflink out of my pocket and showed it to him. Then I smiled as I said, "So you're my knight in shining armor then? The one who saved me from Naomi's horrible prank?" Mark looked at the cufflink and then said to me,
"What are you talking about? Listen, I don't have the time or energy to get involved in Naomi's stupid pranks."
Although I was quite surprised by Mark's denial, I figured he was just shy. Then I said, "It's okay. Don't be shy. I just want to thank you." But before I could even finish my sentence, he'd walked away. All right, I know this guy's stubbornness. If he didn't want to admit it, I would not bring it up again. So I just smiled and put the cufflink back in my pocket and headed downstairs. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about Mark. Why had he rescued me? I thought he was the worst when I'd first met him, but that night in Vegas, we'd had so much fun. But then he'd left me all alone. But then he'd rescued me. It was so confusing. He'd acted cold because he had some cool guy persona to keep up, but I could feel that underneath he was the sweetest, caring guy. And this just made me want to get to know him even more. Back at Plutus Heights, I felt closer to everyone after the trip. Aaliyah was being particularly sweet to me, and one day she came to my room while I was working on a project. She looked sad and let out a big sigh as she said, "Lou, you gotta help me. I really need some advice." "What happened?" I asked her. Then she said, "My parents want me to marry the CEO of their partner company. They said it'll give our family more power and make us look good." She was almost crying as she told me this. I couldn't believe that in this day and age, there were still people arranging marriages like this, all for status and power. That's not how love works. What happened to freedom of choice? She was sobbing now as she told me the rest of the story. "This man has been chasing me for a while now. He often visits my parents' house, and I thought it was to see my dad. But now I realize it was because of me. It makes me sick. My parents keep saying I'll never have to worry about a thing because he's super rich. But he's 41. I don't want to marry some old rich guy." "What? He was like double her age. Aaliyah was only 19. That was insane. What were her parents thinking?" I comforted her and asked, "Did you try telling your parents you're not interested?" She said, "I did. I tried everything. I begged them. But they insisted that I follow the family tradition, that a daughter's marriage should be chosen by the parents because they know what's best for her. Honestly, could my life get any worse?" Poor Aaliyah. I felt so sorry for her. "Is there anything I can do to help?" I asked her. She looked at me through tears and said, "Really? You'll help me?" So I said, duh. We're friends, right? That's what friends are for." So then she told me she needed to find a guy who would pretend to be her boyfriend because she'd already blurted out to her parents that she was dating someone. Then she said, "My mom and dad want me to meet him this weekend to see if he's suitable enough for me to marry." "Have you found anyone yet?" I asked her. Then she said, "Nope, but I need someone good-looking, smart, and most importantly, he must come from a rich family. Out of our friends, the only one who ticks all of those boxes is Mark. And, okay, I'm going to be honest with you now. I've had a serious crush on him ever since I moved in here. So maybe this is my chance. I know it's so awkward to ask him, but you're in his investment club, and you two talk to each other quite often. So can you go ask him for me? Please?" Okay, I didn't like this idea one bit. Aaliyah said she had a crush on Mark, huh? I weirdly felt so uncomfortable knowing this. Suddenly, I realized that I seemed to have a crush on him too. Ever since returning from the trip to Will's hunting ranch, he had always been the last person I thought about before falling asleep. But then, maybe it was just to trick her parents. And she was my friend. I had to help her, right? So I told her I'd chat to Mark. Gosh, I'm a good friend. She was so happy and said, "Oh, Lou, thank you so much. Make sure he knows it's not for real. It's just a favor. He'll be saving my life." Okay, cool. So it was all just to please her parents. It wasn't real, and I had nothing to worry about, right? Aaliyah had been such a good friend to me, so this was the least I could do to help her. The next day, on the way back from the investment club, my car stalled right in the middle of the road and wouldn't start. I had no idea what was wrong, so I had to call and get assistance. As I was on the phone, I noticed Mark's fancy convertible parked next to me.
"Get in the car,"
he said.
"I just called the towing service."
OMG, I couldn't believe it. Once again, he showed up just when I needed help. He really was my knight in shining armor. I got into his car, and there was this super awkward silence. Then I plucked up the courage to speak to him. "Mark, are you free this Saturday? I wanted to ask if you could do me a favor. Would that be okay?"
"I'm never free,"
he replied. "Oh, okay. I mean, I knew he was a very busy person, so it was stupid of me to have even asked him. But then he said,
"What do you need?"
"Oh, so he was giving me a chance." I then told him Aaliyah's story and then nervously asked him if he'd pretend to be her boyfriend to impress her parents. I did not expect Mark to respond in the way that he did. He just laughed and said,
"How childish. Can't you think of a more convincing way? Aaliyah should just prove to her parents that she was mature enough to make her own marriage decisions."
Aaliyah tried, but it was hopeless. I put on my most persuasive face and stared at him with my puppy dog eyes all sad. This face always won my parents over, and I really hoped it would touch his heart too. He took one look at me and looked like he was about to laugh, but then he said,
"Fine, but just this one time, okay? I don't want to get caught up in all this immature love drama."
Yes! It had worked! Without even thinking, I reached over and gave him the biggest hug. I couldn't stop smiling. In a second, I secretly wished it was me who got to take him to dinner with my parents instead of Aaliyah. Then, something crazy happened. Saturday rolled around, and Aaliyah invited me to the dinner too. She thought it would make things less awkward because her parents already knew me, and I may help the conversation flow. Well, things didn't exactly go to plan. After only 10 minutes of sitting together, Aaliyah's parents outright said that Mark didn't deserve Aaliyah, that his family wasn't prestigious enough, and that they'd only gotten rich from investing in some land, and that it was just luck, not hard work or talent that had got them to where they were today. I looked over at Mark. His face was bright red, and I knew how much this was hurting him. For a guy with high self-esteem like Mark, this was just too much to bear. He immediately stood up and politely excused himself, then walked out of the restaurant. Aaliyah got up to chase after him, but her mom grabbed her arm and stopped her, so I went instead. When I got outside, I tried to pull Mark's hand back, but he pushed me away and shouted,
"Are you satisfied? They just insulted my whole family. And what's wrong with being lucky? Just because they were lucky doesn't mean they didn't work their butts off to get there. My parents are the hardest working people that I know. No one insults my family like that. No one. Do you hear me? Now leave me alone. You and Aaliyah, stay away from me."
"Mark, listen to me. Her parents didn't mean it like that. They're just blinded by their family tradition. They can't see past it. You're an amazing guy. Not many 19-year-olds work as hard as you do. You're so talented, and I admire you for this. Honestly, you're so inspiring." Mark just stared at me. Maybe, other than me, nobody had ever said that to him. Then, after a silent moment, he opened his car door and offered to drive me home. He was silent the whole way home, but after that evening, he acted differently around me. He'd always been kinda grumpy, but it was like he'd softened now and became more friendly to me. Every time I saw him, he smiled at me, and it made me so happy. He was also much more open to me. Our conversation not only revolved around the investment club, but we also shared our hobbies, family, dreams, and the things we wanted to achieve after graduation. The more we talked, the more I realized how talented and determined he was. His strictness in the club was actually how he trained himself and others to achieve their goals. That really made me admire him. And I'm not gonna lie, that admiration in me was slowly turning into a special feeling. Well, I think it could be love. As for Aaliyah, after that incident, she apologized to me and Mark for getting us involved and said her parents were so traditional. Other than that, she never mentioned this crush she had on Mark again, and I felt relieved. At least I could comfortably hang out with Mark and dream of a further future between us without having to worry that it would upset Aaliyah. And then one day, Mark asked me if I wanted to go to the grocery store with him to pick up some snacks for our Plutus Heights movie night. I happily agreed, and in the store, Mark suddenly turned to me and said,
"Can you hold this, please?"
I turned around to take whatever he was holding and said, "Sure, what is it?" Then he grinned and said,
"My hand."
In the middle of the store, he grabbed my hand and didn't let go. OMG! I couldn't believe it! This was the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for me. I couldn't believe how much he'd changed. He was so cute. I blushed and held his hand tighter. In that moment, I'd never been happier, and I wanted Mark to be by my side forever. Stay tuned for Season 2, where the drama of Plutus Heights continues. Will things develop between Mark and I? Only time will tell. Hi again, it's me, Lou. In Season 1, I told you guys about how I moved into a luxury mansion called Plutus Heights. I lived there with 6 other rich kids: Jeremy, Mark, Will, David, Aaliyah, Naomi, and got involved in all kinds of drama. First, there was David using me as his fake girlfriend. But later, he actually asked me to go out with him for real. Then there were rumors that Jeremy was having an affair with me, and so his girlfriend Naomi made my life hell. But luckily, a handsome mystery man came to the rescue, who turned out to be Mark. Now Mark and I are dating, and I've never been happier. Well, so are you ready for Season 2? Honestly, things between Mark and I have been great, and so have things at Plutus Heights. It's as if all the drama fizzled out, and the 7 of us were getting along so well. We even decided to take a big group trip together to celebrate the end of the semester. And because we were all nearing the end of our time at college, which meant we wouldn't be living together much longer, we were having a Mediterranean cruise trip, traveling through Spain, Portugal, France. But when we were on the way to our next destination, Venice, Italy, the pandemic suddenly broke out of nowhere. So obviously, we had to change the itineraries and shorten our trip, which was a bummer, but luckily, we were solely traveling on our private cruise and staying in private resorts. So we weren't in danger. That's the most important thing. Though, along with the chaos going on out there with planet Earth, stuff on the cruise wasn't exactly peaceful either. A new chapter of drama has begun. One night, we were out drinking on the deck, enjoying some fancy French wine that we'd picked up along the way. It was the perfect night. The weather was warm and balmy, the stars were out, and there was this cool sea breeze all around us. I'd never experienced anything like it before. Even though my parents are rich, they didn't really flash their cash around, so I'd never really learned how to fully make the most of life like my friends had. And I thought, it's not too bad leading a modest life. Everyone even joked with me, saying that I was too uptight, and that my family was rich, but it was such a shame that I didn't know how to spend money. They were probably right. I really should let loose a bit and enjoy life a little more, as trips like this have been really fun. That night, we were drinking and chatting when suddenly, Jeremy got up and said he had to have an emergency call with his tour manager after COVID had caused his tour to get canceled. That was so unfortunate. Everyone kinda quieted down after he left. Then Mark leaned over to me and said,
Let's go back to our room too, babe.
And that's when Aaliyah looked over at us and whined, Ew, get a room! I can't stand watching you 2 lovebirds. Then she got up and left. It was kinda awkward, but David quickly interrupted and said,
What is wrong with you guys? You're such party poopers. Stop killing my vibe. Listen up. No one is leaving until we finish this bottle.
And at that, he popped open another bottle of champers, and we all cheered. We ended up staying up super late, reminiscing about the trip so far, and looking at all our photos. It was so much fun, and we all had a good laugh. At one point, Naomi popped up from her seat. Oh, Lou, remember that pic I took of you at Parkwell? That one was so funny. It's on Jeremy's camera, though. Let me go get it. Oh, and where's Aaliyah? Let me go get her, too. Then she ran off in excitement. We were all tipsy by this point, and in a good mood. We started talking about where we'd go next on our trip, and I suggested we should make this an annual thing because it had been so much fun. But just as I said that, I heard someone yelling. It was Naomi, and she didn't sound excited anymore. She was super angry. I can't believe it! In our bedroom? Jeremy, are you for real? You're cheating on me in our own room? What is wrong with you? Oh my God, Jeremy was a serial cheater. Poor Naomi. And then I started to panic. Who had he been cheating with? Please tell me it wasn't Aaliyah. We all ran to the room, and I prayed so hard that it wouldn't be her, because then our friendships would all be over. The whole way to the room, we could hear Jeremy and Naomi shouting at each other. I am speechless, Jer. What do you have to say for yourself, Naomi screamed. Then Jeremy said,
I thought it was you, babe. I'm a bit drunk. And she came into the room and it was dark and...
Then Naomi interrupted, saying, What? You thought it was me? You're drunk, but you're not blind. Look, we look nothing alike. You've sunk too low this time, Jer. We caught up with them, and when we looked into their room, Jeremy was on the floor begging Naomi for forgiveness, and there was another girl on the bed. The maid! Oh my God, he cheated on Naomi with the maid. But at least, thank goodness, it wasn't Aaliyah. It could have been so much worse. Eventually, Aaliyah showed up to help me calm Naomi down, and that night, the three of us slept in Aaliyah's room. We couldn't leave Naomi alone because she was so upset. I couldn't believe how everything had just changed in the blink of an eye. One moment we were having the best vacation of our lives, and the next, it was all a mess. Naomi only fell asleep around 3 a.m., and I only know that was the time because my dad suddenly called me. I would have thought it was strange, but it was still evening back in New York. Maybe he was missing me. I was actually relieved to speak to him, and I excitedly said, Hi, Dad. What's up? But as soon as I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. He didn't sound happy at all.
Pumpkin, there's this thing, you see. Our company, well, it's having some trouble. This pandemic is so harsh. Could you come home soon? I really need your help.
After that call, I couldn't sleep a wink. I was so worried about my family. The next morning, I told everyone what had happened, and they were so understanding. Will even offered to lend me his private jet so I could get home ASAP. Mark decided to come with me, so we packed up and got ready to leave. I felt so bad leaving Naomi after what had happened, but now I had my own heartbreaking news to deal with too. When we got home, my mom and dad sat us down, and it took a few minutes to tell me what was going on. The truth was, my dad had just filed for bankruptcy. It felt like my whole world had just come crumbling down around me as I heard my dad tell me. My whole body was shaking, and all I could say was, No! What? Then my dad explained.
I'm afraid we just couldn't survive this pandemic. Our branches in Asia have been frozen for months, and now in Europe too. The domestic ones don't seem to be able to hold up for long either. It's been so hard, and there's nothing we can do now. But don't worry, Pumpkin. Just finish your studies. That's the important thing. We can still afford your last semester. Go get that degree, then come help me revive our company, okay?
By the time he'd finished speaking, he was choked up, and we both started crying as he reached out to give me a big hug. I had to be strong and push through my last semester and graduate, no matter what. But it wasn't going to be easy. The news was already out. It was all over the internet, and even in the newspapers. Everyone knew my family had gone bankrupt, and I felt like all eyes were on me everywhere I went. It was so stressful, and I knew people were whispering about me. I was nervous to go back to the investment club, aka the rich kid club, because I knew they'd look down on me and my family now. And they did. Now, they made me do tasks that only newbies had to do, like collecting data and stuff. One time we had a team meeting, and Mark needed someone to be team leader for the upcoming project.
Who do you guys think will be suitable for this task?
Mark said. To be honest, I didn't care. My head was elsewhere, worrying about my family's situation, but I quickly snapped back as I heard a girl mentioning my name. Anyone but Louise, because obviously, her family's company is dead. We don't want her to push us into bankruptcy too. Everyone laughed, and I was so humiliated. I almost burst into tears in front of them all and had to clench my fists and bite my cheek to stop myself from embarrassing myself even more. Suddenly, Mark slammed his fists down on the table and told them off. I was so grateful to him, but at the same time, embarrassed. I felt so vulnerable all of a sudden. But at least I had Mark. He was the only good thing in my life at that point. Even though he was my shoulder to lean on and we told each other most things, there was one thing I'd been hiding from him. Ever since we got back from the cruise, I'd been receiving hate mail. At first, I thought it was just some kind of prank, but now it felt serious. I was too scared to bring it up, as I didn't want to make the tension at Plutus Heights even worse. Things between Jeremy and Naomi were awful, and Naomi was moving out. So the last thing everyone needed was to hear about my hate mail. It started with a letter that said, "What are you still doing here? You don't belong with the rich kids anymore." Who would say this to me? I didn't want to suspect any of my friends. I mean, why would they say that stuff to me? Plus, the message was made up from cut-off letters in magazines, so I couldn't even base on handwriting or anything to tell who it could be. That continued for 2 or 3 more times. Still, I tried to ignore it. But one night, after an exhausting day at school, I threw myself onto my bed and picked up my favorite book. But as I opened it, a letter fell onto me. More hate mail! This one said, "So you're still here? Becoming a gold digger now, are you? We all know you can't afford to live here, and no one likes you anyway, so get your poor ass out of here. You're ruining our reputation." That was the cherry on top! I already felt stressed at college from all the gossip, and now I didn't even feel safe in my own home. This wasn't a home anymore. I immediately got up and packed my suitcase, crying as I did it. It was simple. I'd just leave. I hoped they'd all be happy now. It was already late, so everyone was in their rooms. I couldn't face seeing them, so I dragged my suitcase as quietly as possible downstairs to leave the house. I didn't even think about where I was going. I just figured I'd get out, find a cab, and go stay in some motel near the campus. As I was walking, I heard a car honking from across the road.
Lou! Hey, Lou! Is that you? What are you doing outside this late?
I turned around and saw it was David, and as soon as he saw me with tears streaming down my face, he leapt out of the car and came running over to me.
Hey, what happened?
He asked me. "I'm leaving," I told him through tears. "That's what everyone wants, right? I'm sorry I bothered you all for so long." He looked confused and said,
"What? Who wants that? I don't. Come on, don't be ridiculous. Come back to the house. Let's sort this out."
I refused and told him to leave me alone, but he'd already grabbed my suitcase and then he grabbed my hand and made me get in the car. I was really crying by this point as I told him about the hate mail, and he was so mad. As soon as we got home, he shouted at the top of his voice,
"Emergency meeting now! Everyone wake up!"
Then he ran around the house knocking on everyone's doors, even though I tried to stop him.